I'd now like to turn it over to Matt Jachowski, Executive Assistant to Mayor Bissen.
All right. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of the data around housing affordability, home construction, and these rentals. So, you know, Bill 9 primarily is going to talk about bringing condos online for our residents, but the reason why we're even looking at condos is because the situation with our single-family homes is so out of control for our residents. In 2024, single-family home sale prices were at all-time highs. This isn't just all-time highs, but inflation-adjusted all-time highs. In West Maui, in 2024, the median single-family home price was $1.9 million. That's more than 20 times what a family that lives in West Maui earns in a year. That's completely unaffordable to them. In South Maui, it's not much better, $1.6 million for the median sale price. But this is not new. This is not a phenomenon of the past few years. This has actually been going on for at least 25 years, and it's made housing unaffordable for an entire generation that lives here on Maui. We can see this by looking at real property tax data and look at how many sales every year going back to the 80s are affordable to our typical families here. What we see is that in the 80s and 90s, 50 to 70% of all of our home sales were affordable to our median family. That means my parents were able to afford a home here when they bought their home. But if we look in the past 25 years, we can see that number has plummeted. And it's been increasingly impossible for our families to afford to buy homes here, which is why so many of our families, younger families, currently live in the homes that their parents and their grandparents and beyond purchased. We can see that even as recently as the past 5 years, less than 10% of all home sales in Maui County are affordable to our median families. We talked about how affordability is worst in West Maui and South Maui. So let's look at that same graph, but also put the West Maui data up there. We can see that West Maui has always been less affordable than Maui County as a whole, but even in the 80s and 90s, it was still the case that 40 to almost 50% of all home sales were affordable to our local families. However, in the past 25 years, that the number of affordable home sales has become vanishingly small, to the point where in the past 5 years, just 5% of all home sales every year, that's 10 homes or less every year that are affordable to our local families. The data for South Maui is pretty similar, so I'm going to fly through it here. But we can see that in the past 5 years, just 4% of home sales are affordable to our typical families. So let's talk about the possible solutions. And the most popular solution that people like to propose as an alternative to Bill 9 is construction. And construction is indeed an important solution to pursue. But the reality is it's going to take so long that this is really just a solution for my grandchildren and maybe even my great-grandchildren. So again, we can go to real property tax data and look at home construction rates across the county going back to the 70s. We can see that in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, we were building 900 to 1,500 new homes per year on average. That was really growing our housing supply and really contributed to housing being affordable to our families. But we can see that's really plummeted in the past 15 years, and we're building at historically low rates here in Maui County. Now we need to zoom in on West Maui and South Maui again, where our housing crisis is worst. And we can see that really housing was high in the 70s and it's just dropped ever since then. To the point where in the past 15 years, we're building fewer than 90 new homes per year in West Maui and South Maui. On top of that, in addition to building extremely few homes in West Maui and South Maui, most of those homes do not end up housing our residents. So we can look at all those new homes that have been built in the past 15 years, and we can say, are you owner-occupied now, long-term rental, non-owner-occupied, so it's like a second home or a vacation home, or a short-term rental. And we find that just 40% of these new homes we've built in both West Maui and South Maui are currently housing our residents. That's so important, I'm going to say it again. In West Maui and South Maui, just 4 out of 10 of the new homes we're building house our residents. So Bill 9 proposes to phase out 6,000 transient vacation rentals and have them become resident housing. 2,275 of those units are in West Maui. It would take 30 years at current construction rates to build that many new homes in West Maui. That's not even accounting for the fact that we need to rebuild Lahaina first. If we take into account that only 40% of those homes are going to go to our residents at current owner occupancy rates, it's going to take 73 years to build enough homes for our residents. South Maui is even worse. Bill 9 proposes to convert almost 3,700 homes in West Maui, which would take 79 years to build at current construction rates, and an almost absurd 208 years to build if you account for the fact that only 40% of those homes are going to go to our residents. So Where that leaves us is the only other solution that's really on the table, which is the TBR phase out. And that's the only solution been proposed that can actually make progress on our housing crisis. The reason why we're talking about this, Maui has about 13,000 transient vacation rentals. Let's put that into a global context. The UHERO report, which we're going to talk more about coming up here, cites Los Angeles, Boston, Barcelona, and London as global tourist destinations that have all identified transient vacation rentals as reducing resident housing inventory and increasing housing costs, and they all have economic studies to back this up. It's all cited in the UHERO report. In each of these cases, transient vacation rentals represent just 1 to 3% of their housing supply. In Maui County, transient vacation rentals are 21% of our housing supply. So Maui County is in a totally different category here in terms of the impact they have on our housing market. We can also look at how Maui stacks up against the other counties in our state. So here we don't have exact numbers of transient vacation rentals on every island, but what the State Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism does is they scrape VRBO and Airbnb and the booking platforms and find how many actively listed vacation rentals there are on each island. They find that in Maui County, we have about 10,000 actively listed short-term rentals on a given day. That's about 14% of our housing supply. Just for comparison, the city and county of Honolulu, which is much larger, has many more housing units. They have fewer short-term vacation rentals, and those rentals only represent 2% of their housing market, right? So is there any good reason why Maui needs to be have so many more vacation rentals, both in absolute numbers and relative numbers than any other county? If Bill 9 passes and we phase out about half of these short-term vacation rentals, Maui County goes from becoming the third largest county with the most vacation rentals to becoming the third largest county with the third most vacation rentals, right in line with the other counties. These units are located where the housing crisis is worst, and that's really important, right? Here's just a map of where all the units are. We all know they're in West Maui and South Maui predominantly. These units have a history of resident occupancy. So real property data in 1993 started actually tracking owner occupancy. So that's how far back we can go. But we can see that historically we've had over 80% of these complexes with owner occupants. And that's dropped in recent years, but it's still very high. These units are appropriately sized. This is misinformation that is often cited by opposition to this bill, that no one wants to live in 1 and 2 bedroom units. That's not true. 91% of these units are 1 and 2 bedroom units. Well, we just had a big natural disaster in Lahaina, and in fact, there was a huge housing effort to house all the families that needed housing. Data independently collected from FEMA's housing programs, from the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement's housing programs, and Maui Holly Match, which is the housing program I built as a website, all found that 1 to 2 bedroom housing was the highest demand housing for our displaced families in West Maui. Furthermore, we can look at U.S. Census Bureau data, the most recent American Community Survey. They find that 72% of all Maui households are 1 to 3 person households. These are perfect size households for 1 to 2 bedroom condo units. Okay, this is the big one. Bill 9 improves condo affordability. And we're going to reference a lot of the UHERO report here. But before I go there, let's just set the baseline. Before Bill 9, condos are already the most affordable market rate housing on Maui. So we started off by talking about how unaffordable single family homes on Maui are. So I'm going to show for West Maui specifically here, the blue bars are how many single family home sales were affordable every year. And the orange bar is the percentage of affordable condo sales every year. The important thing here is that the orange bars are all higher. Every single year, we have significantly more condo sales that are affordable to our families because condos are cheaper. And in particular, we need to look especially at the most recent years, where we can see that as early as 2000 and 2010, 40 to 50% of all condo sales were affordable to our families. Okay, here's the biggest takeaway from the UHERO report. This is a direct quote. We project that condo prices on Maui will decrease by 25% by 2027. Therefore, affordability would improve because prices decrease more than incomes. So they're saying that not only will these Bill 9 condos become significantly more affordable, but all condos on Maui will become significantly more affordable. Let's see how they break that out. They looked at the carrying cost of one of these Bill 9 condos, including mortgage, insurance, maintenance, HOA fees, and taxes. And they said pre-phase out, the carrying cost of one of these units is $5,800 per month. They're saying post phase out, that becomes $4,600 per month, right? So that's the impact of being able to use these units as a TBR. It inflates the prices by over $1,200 per month, or over 20%. Now, there's every reason to believe that if these units become resident units, that these prices would go down even more, right? Because owners or actual residents here don't necessarily want things like resort level landscaping that cost a lot of money. So if we look at the UHERO numbers, though, and the numbers they cite in their report, they say that 21% of our families, or over 11,600 households, will be able to comfortably afford these units. But actually, many of our families here on Maui cannot comfortably afford the units they live in right now, right? It's called cost burdened. If you spend more than 30% of your income on housing, and less than 50% of your income on housing, you're cost burdened. So let's consider those people in this analysis too. UHERO says there's an additional 15,500 households more that would be in this cost burden category who could afford these units. Adding this together, combined, these units could be attainable to 49% of all households on Maui. That is much needed by our families. Okay, nothing's free, so let's address some of UHERO's concerns. They say we're going to have 32% fewer tourists, potentially, if we do Bill 9. Let's talk about that in the context of the Maui Island Plan. I think you guys are all familiar with this. One of the main tenets of the Maui Island Plan is that we should be leaving our visitor to resident ratio at 1 to 3. On an average day, 1 visitor to every 3 residents. This isn't a number pulled out of air. This is actually from collecting feedback from residents for 5 years. 5 years of research, and this was adopted by the county in 2012. Well, let's see, where were we? 2023 pre-fire, we were at a 44% visitor to resident ratio. That's 1 visitor to every 2.3 residents. I would call that over-tourism. Post phase out, if UHERO's prediction becomes correct, that ratio drops to 30% visitor to resident ratio, or 1 visitor, 3.3 residents, which is exactly where we're supposed to be according to the Maui Island Plan. They also talk about how total visitor spending will decrease by 15%. And the way they broke that out, they said the typical visitor spends $310 per day. That's split between lodging and non-lodging expenses. 174 of those dollars is on lodging. That's more than half. So 56% of this lost visitor spending will be on lodging revenue. Well, what we can do is we can look at the owners of all of these Minatoya transient vacation rentals and say, do you actually live on Maui County, right? Are you a long-term renter or an owner here in Maui County? 94% of the owners of these units are not, okay? So what does that mean? 94% of the lost lodging revenue will be lost by our non-resident owners, not our residents. Why is that important? That's important because, yes, they're going to pay some amount to their cleaners, but there's going to be a hefty booking fee taken by Airbnb or VRBO or whoever they're using. That's not going to stay here on Maui, and they're going to take a significant chunk of this money away from Maui with them. So this means much of this lost lodging money was never going to stay on Maui anyway. So UHERO is probably correct that we're going to lose, a significant amount of revenue, but we have to remember that not all that revenue was going to stay and circulate in our community in the first place. The very last point I want to talk about here is water. So there's 2 properties in apartment zone districts. They're like sister properties. One was built right before the Minatoya cutoff, so it's allowed to have TBRs. The other one was built right after the Minatoya cutoff, so it's not allowed to have TBRs. But otherwise, they look very similar, and they were developed by the same people, and they have the same mix of units. Property 1, which allows TBRs, 97% TBRs, their average unit uses 570 gallons of water per day. Property 2, which is 74% non-owners and 26% residents, uses an average of 128 gallons per day. Now, we can't do a naive comparison of these 2 numbers because non-owners aren't here all the time. But if we take that into account, what we find is that TBRs in these 2 complexes use 60 to 120% more water than our resident condos use across the course of a year. Why is that important? That's important because literally the lack of water is blocking new housing from being developed. I think we all know, for example, about the Pulelehua project in West Maui, which cannot move forward because there's not enough water. So what does this mean? If we were to convert 6,000 of these TBRs into resident housing, we wouldn't just get 6,000 new resident homes, but we would free up excess water for 3,600 to 7,200 additional resident homes. So in summary, right, Maui desperately needs more resident housing, and the TBR phase out is the only solution on the table that accelerates this housing by decades. Mahalo.
do you have any closing?
Mahalo to all of our presenters. As mayor, my responsibility is always to put the greater good of our people first. Housing is not a speculative asset. It is a basic human need. And when the balance is tipped so far that our residents become outsiders in their own neighborhoods, we have a moral obligation to act. Council members, today you may hear passionate opposition from property managers, non-resident owners, and booking platforms. You may also hear from some of the 268 local owners who represent 6% of the approximate 6,000 TBR units that are impacted. But you may also hear from rent-burdened, hardworking families, from kupuna on fixed incomes, and from displaced Lahaina residents, some still in temporary housing, who are holding on to hope that their future will lead them to a place they can call home. Addressing this crisis will require the collective kuleana of our entire community, and it starts right here with us. We cannot continue doing what we've always done and expect a different outcome. The status quo is failing our people, and this housing crisis demands bold, decisive, and forward-thinking action. As leaders, we are not just observers of the future, we are shapers of it. So I ask, what is the value of keeping our people here in the only home they've ever known? Now, while Maui County may be financially sound and well-resourced, can we truly say we are thriving as a community if our own people, our ohana, our kupuna, and our keiki, are being priced out of their own community? Even the chance to give our people hope is worth more than preserving a system that has pushed them to the margins. This crisis has been building for decades, but now we have a real and tangible opportunity to change its course. Our people are hurting, and we must act, not with hesitation, but with the courage that leadership demands. Bill 9 is more than a policy. It is a promise to our people, a promise to restore balance, to protect our residents, and to put our community first. As we move forward, I ask everyone engaging in this conversation to remain respectful and recognize that while this bill impacts some more than others, it offers hope and healing to many who have gone without far too long. Let us continue to lead with aloha in our words, our actions, and our commitment to one another. We humbly ask that this council advance Bill 9 out of committee and support its passage. Mahalo to everyone.
Mahalo, Mayor, and your team for your presentation.